The fog of London comes down, covering not just its streets but also its secrets, hiding reasons and crimes in a mist that only the smartest minds can see through. It is at times like this, when the gas lamps glow like watching eyes, and the sound of carriage wheels fades into the night, that Holmes's brilliance becomes most clear. To regular people, the city is a mess of shadows and whispers. But to Holmes, it is an open book, every movement, footprint, and word waiting to be figured out. I, his loyal friend, have long been amazed by the skill with which he brings order from confusion, as if he alone has the key to London's hidden music. In the case of Ravenhill House, this gift would once again be tested, because beneath its ivy-covered walls stayed a widow's silence, and in that silence lay the echo of a secret too dangerous to stay buried. Before we go further into the mystery, let me say a quick word keeping with the style of modern storytelling. If you find yourself interested by the shadows we are about to explore, by the excitement of solving crimes and the quiet bravery it requires, then do not hesitate to show your support by liking this tale, sharing it with others who think like you, and subscribing to hear more of Holmes's adventures. Such actions make sure that the gaslight of these stories continues to burn, keeping away the approaching darkness. It was on a dreary November morning, the fog hanging low in the streets like a sheet, that the message first came. I'd visited my old friend in Baker Street, as was often my habit when the military practice of waking up early made me look for entertainment elsewhere. The fire crackled with a cheerful glow, and Holmes, wrapped in his dressing gown, sat with pipe in hand, his grey eyes fixed upon the moving smoke as if reading some hidden code in its curling shapes. He had been in one of his long moods of deep thought, speaking little, taking no food except his usual coffee, and filling the air with a strong smell of tobacco. It was in this atmosphere of decorated silence that the sound of the bell woke us both, followed quickly by the familiar footsteps of our page boy upon the stairs. Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram upon a tray, her face showing more curiosity than she would admit in words. Holmes looked at the envelope with a flash of interest, his long fingers tearing it open in a single movement. He read the contents, his eyebrows coming together for a moment before smoothing into their usual calmness. Without a word, he held the message toward me. I took it and read to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street. Please come at once. Most urgent, need privacy. Ravenhill House, Surrey, signed Margaret Alcroft. The message, though short, carried the clear tone of distress. I watched Holmes with some impatience, because he had picked up his pipe again, the telegram hanging loosely between my fingers. Well, Holmes, I said, what do you think of it? He blew out a thin stream of smoke, his look distant. The name, Watson? Margaret Alcroft, widow of Sir Edward Alcroft, late of Ravenhill House, a man of some fame in political circles until his death last year, under conditions the press found strangely unremarkable. Do you remember the brief notices? I searched my memory but found little more than a fuzzy memory of the man's passing, a line or two in the columns of the Times, soon lost among the daily flow of news. Holmes continued, his voice low but filled with energy. It was too quiet, Watson, too quickly forgotten, and now an urgent request for privacy from the widow. Notice the wording. She does not ask for help, but insists upon secrecy. That, my dear fellow, is the true call. His words stirred in me that old sense of excitement, which had come with so many of our adventures. The fog beyond the window seemed suddenly filled with mystery, the dull rattle of carriage wheels an introduction to some unfolding drama. Holmes rose with sudden decision, throwing aside his dressing gown and putting on coat and hat in quick succession. Come, Watson. There is work for us in Surrey, and the sooner we leave, the more daylight remains to light up Ravenhill's shadows. Within the hour we were seated in a cab, the city's gas lamps glowing faintly through the mist, as the horse clattered toward Waterloo Station. The damp air carried with it the smell of coal smoke and wet stone, mixing with the cries of newsboys selling the latest edition. Holmes sat across from me, his thin figure half hidden in the folds of his overcoat, eyes closed, yet his mind, no doubt racing along unseen paths of reasoning. I held back from disturbing his thoughts, though my own imagination was far from still. What tragedy or scandal forced Lady Alcroft to reach out in this way? What ghost haunted the halls of Ravenhill House? The train took us quickly from the heart of London, the fog getting thicker as we left behind the familiar towers and chimneys. Fields stretched dimly beyond the windows, hedgerows dissolving into shadow, while the rhythmic clatter of the wheels gave a strange hypnotic quality to our journey. Holmes remained silent, yet his fingers tapped restlessly upon the armrest, showing the tension of a hunter sensing prey. I knew that in his mind he had already built a dozen possibilities, each waiting to be measured against the facts that waited for us. At length he opened his eyes, fixing me with that piercing look which seemed to see through both fog and flesh. "Watson," he said, "look at the exactness of her words once more. Need privacy. A lady in distress would typically speak of danger, of fear, of protection. To demand privacy is to admit the presence of forces that grow in secrecy. Mark me well, we are not entering upon a case of simple burglary or village gossip. This will touch upon matters the public eye must not see." The train whistled as it cut through the gloom, and I felt a chill that was not entirely of the season. The call had been simple, almost plain, yet beneath its shortness lurked the suggestion of hidden drama, of some danger not easily named. I leaned back against the cushioned seat, my thoughts racing toward the unseen house that waited for us, its windows covered in ivy, its halls heavy with silence. Ravenhill House. Even the name carried with it a weight of warning. The countryside rolled past in ghostly shades, and I could not shake the feeling that we were being pulled not merely to a household in distress, but into a theatre already prepared, its stage set with shadows, its actors hidden behind curtains of secrecy. Holmes, with his strange awareness, seemed to sense it too. His eyes gleamed with that peculiar fire. I had come to connect with the most dangerous of our undertakings. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would not come out unchanged. The train took us into Surrey's damp embrace, the twilight deepening as we neared our destination. When at last we got off at the small country station, a waiting carriage appeared, its coachman a silent fellow who touched his cap but spoke no word. The wheels rumbled along the narrow lanes, their iron rims striking sparks from stones hidden beneath the autumn leaves. The air carried the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves, mixed with the faint smoke of distant fireplaces, and the chill seemed to grow more deep with every mile that placed us further from the warmth of London's familiar bustle. Holmes sat with his head tilted, his profile sharp against the dim glow of the carriage lamp. "Look, Watson," he whispered, nodding toward the glass pane as the outline of a great house came into view, its towers and chimneys rising sharp against the clouded sky. "Ravenhill, a place built to hide rather than to welcome. Notice the narrow windows, the ivy thick as a curtain. It is the building design of secrecy." The carriage swung through iron gates and up a gravelled drive, the crunch beneath the wheels echoing in the stillness. Ravenhill House rose above us, its stonework darkened by age and dampness, the kind of building that seems to think upon its own history. Lights glowed faintly from within. A few golden squares pierced through the ivy and gloom, but most of its windows stared blank and lifeless into the night. As we got out, the great oak door opened soundlessly, revealing a figure dressed in mourning black. Lady Margaret Alcroft received us in the entrance hall, her face pale, her eyes shadowed by worry. She was a woman of no great years, perhaps 35, but grief had set its mark upon her face, giving her an air of fragility. Yet there was pride too in the way she held her shoulders, and a certain strength that hid her shaking hands. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice low yet steady. "I am grateful you have come." Holmes bowed with his usual grace, his eyes moving rapidly over the hall, the worn carpet at the foot of the stairs, the portraits dark with smoke, the faint smell of polish, mixed with dampness that hung in the air. "We are at your service, Lady Alcroft," he replied, "though it is you who must guide us as to the nature of your need. For now, perhaps you will allow Dr. Watson and myself to refresh ourselves after the journey." She nodded her head, and a servant stepped forward to take our coats. As I followed Holmes through the echoing hallways, I could not help but notice the hush that lay upon the house. Not merely the quiet of morning, but a deeper silence, as if the walls themselves had agreed to keep some secret. A draught stirred the tapestries, and the lamp flames flickered faintly, casting fleeting shapes along the stone. We were shown into a drawing-room where a fire burned low upon the grate. Lady Alcroft motioned for us to sit, but she herself remained standing, hands clasped before her as if to hold back their trembling. Holmes looked at her with that calm intensity which so often relaxed the most hesitant of witnesses. At length she spoke. "I shall tell you all, Mr. Holmes, but understand this. What I reveal must go no further. My husband's name, his memory, the very safety of my household depends upon your absolute privacy." Holmes nodded his head, his voice almost tender. "You may count on it, madam. Whatever passes in confidence remains so until truth and justice demand otherwise." He leaned forward, pressing his fingertips together, the firelight gleaming upon his sharp features. "Now, if you please, what is the shadow that lies over Ravenhill House?" Lady Alcroft drew a breath, her lips parted as if to form words long held back. The flames flickered, the clock ticked with a measured beat. And in that hanging silence I felt that the mystery into which we had been called was about to unfold its first layer. The first feeling Ravenhill House gave once we had been properly let into its rooms was not merely of age, but of a peculiar kind of watchfulness. It was as if the very walls listened. The drawing room into which Lady Alcroft had led us kept the stiff grandness of the previous generation, with heavy curtains muffling the tall windows, a huge chandelier that had not been lit in years, and portraits whose serious eyes seemed to follow one's movements. The fire gave little warmth, as if reluctant to share its comfort with strangers, and the air smelled of damp stone despite the careful polish of the servants. I could not help but notice how Lady Alcroft's eyes flickered often to the windows, as if fearing to see something beyond the curtain of the ivy. Holmes wasted little time in looking around his surroundings. He did not walk as other men do, casually glancing from object to object, but rather moved with purpose, pausing at one chair, then a writing desk, then the mantel, his eyes sweeping every surface with a hunter's alertness. He bent once to look at the hearthrug, then rose without comment, his fingers brushing the back of a leather armchair with what I could only describe as affectionate curiosity. "A house of silences," he whispered, more to himself than to any of us. "It holds the mark of voices once raised here, now carefully erased." Lady Alcroft motioned us to sit. "You must forgive the darkness, gentlemen. Since my husband's passing, so little of this house has been used. It is far too large for me, and I find the echoes oppressive." She spoke with a shake in her voice, but there was also defiance in the way she straightened her posture, as if daring her own grief to master her. Holmes nodded seriously, his look still moving around the room. "Oppression, madam, is often the companion of neglect, and neglect, whether deliberate or forced, has its reasons. I shall hope to uncover them in due time. When at last we were shown to our rooms for the night, I admit a shiver passed through me. The hallways seemed endless, each lined with narrow windows half swallowed by ivy, through which the moon cast only pale pieces of light. The carpet muffled our steps, yet the house itself groaned as if restless in its sleep. I paused once to look down a side passage, where a single door stood slightly open, blackness yawning beyond. Holmes, noticing my hesitation, gave a faint smile. "Fear not, Watson. An empty hallway cannot harm you. Yet I admit there is an air here which stirs one's instincts." My room lay at the far end of a long gallery. The servant who led me there excused himself in silence, leaving only the sound of my own breath in the stillness. As I unpacked my small case, I found my attention continually drawn to the window. Though heavily covered, I imagined I could hear the rustle of ivy against the glass, like fingers scratching for entry. More than once I crossed the room to draw the drapes tighter, only to find them already fastened. At length I laughed at my own nerves, though my laughter rang hollow in the shadowed room. Sleep came fitfully. I lay awake for hours, listening to the creak of timber, the faint sigh of wind and the distant cry of some night bird beyond the grounds. Each sound seemed magnified by the silence, each shadow invested with sinister meaning. I thought of Lady Alcroft alone in her morning room, of Holmes somewhere near, no doubt as wakeful as myself, his keen mind weaving theories from the very fabric of the house. And in that uneasy half-sleep before dawn I dreamed, or perhaps imagined, that I heard footsteps pause outside my door. The sound was faint, yet clear enough to banish all thought of sleep. It was not the heavy tread of a servant, nor the soft scurry of a mouse in the wainscoting, but the measured pace of someone who lingered listening. I rose quietly, unwilling to show alarm, and stepped to the door. My hand hovered upon the latch, but caution held me back. To fling it wide and find nothing would mark me as fanciful in Holmes's eyes, and yet to ignore the sound would deny the instincts sharpened by years at his side. After a long pause, the steps retreated, the silence swallowing them whole. I returned to bed uneasy, my mind painting phantoms in every shadow. At breakfast the next morning, Holmes appeared as fresh as if he had passed the night in perfect rest, though I imagined a certain brightness in his eye that suggested otherwise. Lady Alcroft joined us, her face subdued yet dignified, though her paleness showed a restless night of her own. When the servants had left, Holmes set down his cup with deliberate care. "You spoke of oppression last night, Lady Alcroft. Please tell me more. In what form do they show themselves?" She hesitated, glancing toward the shuttered windows. "Since my husband's death, I have not known a night without disturbance. There are sounds, sometimes a step upon the stairs, sometimes the faint opening of a door. I've sent the servants away from the upper floors. Yet still it continues. I fear I am haunted, Mr. Holmes, not by spirits of the grave, but by something far more dangerous." Holmes's look sharpened, though his voice remained gentle. "Dangerous indeed if the living walk your hallways by stealth, and yet you have told no one until now." Her eyes filled with tears. She fought to hold back. "I feared scandal. My husband's affairs were complex. His name must not be pulled into further talk. To speak openly might invite ruin." She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, mastering her composure. "But last night I heard the latch of my room door moved, as if some hand sought entry. I can endure no more." Holmes leaned back, pressing his long fingers together. "You are right to call for privacy, Lady Alcroft. A house that allows silence but not sleep is rarely innocent. Tell me, have you noticed any sign, however slight, that a stranger has crossed these thresholds?" For answer, she rose and led us to a long hallway at the rear of the house. One door she unlocked with a small brass key, revealing a room thick with dust. Yet even I, with my untrained eye, noticed that the dust had marks where it had been disturbed, faint footprints that had crossed to the window and back. The curtain had been pulled aside and hastily replaced, leaving the folds uneven. Holmes knelt quickly, his magnifying lens flashing in the pale morning light. The man's boot narrow, size 9 at most. The leather was worn at the heel. He drags the left foot slightly. "Recent, too. Less than a week." Lady Alcroft swayed as if the word struck her physically. "Then I am not mad," she whispered. "It is not my grief creating ghosts." Holmes rose, his face serious, yet animated by the thrill of pursuit. "No, madam, there is flesh and blood at work here, and purpose behind it. Whoever your visitor may be, he has risked much to pass these windows. The question is, what does he seek within Ravenhill House?" The room seemed to hold its breath with us, the dust specks spinning in the shaft of light as if mocking our ignorance. Outside a crow cawed harshly, its cry echoing across the still grounds, and I felt with sudden certainty that Ravenhill had not yet given up its darkest secret. Lady Alcroft closed the door of the disturbed room with a hand that trembled despite her efforts at composure. She led us back to the drawing room, and there, with the fire crackling faintly and the curtains drawn against the grey morning, she at last gave in to Holmes's steady look. She stood for a moment before speaking, her eyes lowered to the rug, as if she feared that even the portraits on the walls might overhear her confession. When at length she raised her look, there was in it a depth of pain I shall not soon forget. "My husband's death," she began, "was said to have been sudden, the result of a stroke. So the doctor declared, and so it was reported. Yet I have never believed it. There were letters I dared not destroy, which spoke of threats, of duties pressing upon him. I was forbidden to read them at the time, but after his passing they came into my hands. I burned some, yet others I could not bring myself to throw into the fire. And since then strange things have happened within these walls, sounds in the night, movements unexplained, the sense always of being watched. I have lived in dread that the past has returned to claim me." Her voice faltered, and she clasped her hands together as if in prayer. Holmes looked at her closely, his keen eyes softening with something that approached sympathy. "You speak of threats, madam. Were they of a financial nature, or did they touch upon matters more personal?" She hesitated, then drew a small packet from within her dress. "I kept these few. You must see for yourself." With visible reluctance, she placed the letters in Holmes's hands. He unfolded them one by one, his look swift yet piercing, while I leaned forward, my own heart quickening with curiosity. The paper was yellowed, the ink blotched in places, but the words were clear enough. They spoke in hidden phrases of duties owed, of promises unfulfilled, and of consequences to be faced if repayment were not made. No names were signed, only initials, crude and angular. Yet the tone was unmistakably one of threat. Holmes laid the letters aside with deliberate care. "This, Watson, is no ordinary debt collecting. Notice how little is said of sums and how much of silence. These men, if men they be, Deal not merely in coin, but in secrets, a dangerous currency." He turned to Lady Alcroft. "Your husband then was tangled in affairs of which the world remains ignorant, and since his death, someone has sought to retrieve that which might expose them. Am I correct?" Her lips quivered, but she gave a faint nod. "I believe so. Once I discovered that my husband's study had been disturbed, his papers searched. Yet the servants swore no one had entered, and last week I myself heard the desk drawer slide open, though I had locked it with my own key." I could not hold back an exclamation. "Surely, madam, you should have called the police at once." She turned to me with a weary smile, gentle yet despairing. "Inspector Lestrade came here once at my request. He looked at little, asked few questions, and left satisfied that my grief had created illusions. I knew then that if I sought aid again, it must be from one who would not dismiss a widow's fears." She fixed her look upon Holmes, and in that moment I saw how desperately she pinned her hope upon his skill. Holmes nodded his head with grave assurance. "You did wisely, Lady Alcroft, for make no mistake, there is more in this house than sorrow. These intrusions are not random, they are purposeful, and until we discover what is sought, neither you nor your household shall know peace." Lady Alcroft sank into the high-backed chair, the firelight glinting against her dark clothing, and for a moment she seemed almost swallowed by the weight of her confession. Holmes remained standing, his lean figure outlined by the glow, his hands clasped behind his back in that familiar posture of restless patience. I could see the quick play of thought upon his features, the eyes darting with a peculiar brilliance, as if putting together pieces of a puzzle invisible to all but himself. "You speak of the study, madam," Holmes said at last. "Please tell us of it. Was your husband in the habit of doing his business within those walls? And were any but yourself let in after his death?" Her voice was low but steady. "It was his sanctuary. He would spend hours there, often late into the night, writing letters which he never allowed me to see. Since his passing, I have kept the door locked because I could not bear the sight of his unfinished work. Yet more than once I've entered to find papers moved, or drawers slightly open, though the lock showed no sign of tampering. It is as if an unseen hand moves there still." Holmes's lips curved faintly, though not in joy. "An unseen hand leaves visible traces if one knows where to look. I shall wish to examine that room without delay." He turned to her more gently. "Forgive me, Lady Alcroft, if my manner seems abrupt. In matters such as these, sentiment is the luxury of later thought." She nodded her head, visibly relieved by his decisive tone. "You cannot offend me, Mr. Holmes. I have lived too long in dread of what lies hidden to shrink from plain words. Only tell me this. Do you believe my husband's death was natural, as the doctor claimed?" Holmes paused, his look fixed upon the fire. For a long moment he seemed as though he might not answer. At last he said, "I believe nothing, madam, until the evidence forces me, but I will admit a stroke in a man still strong who stood at the threshold of further distinction sits uneasily with me. Until I see otherwise, I shall hold your suspicions as worthy of inquiry." Her breath caught, and for the first time since our arrival a tear escaped down her cheek. She brushed it hastily away. "Then I am not alone. For months I have carried the scorn of whisperers, the pity of neighbours, the neglect of officials. To hear you speak thus is a comfort beyond words." Holmes bent toward her with a gentleness I had rarely seen. "You are far from alone, Lady Alcroft. Whatever darkness surrounds Ravenhill, you shall not face it without light." His eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Watson and I shall see to that." The mantel clock struck the hour, its chime echoing through the room like a summons. Holmes straightened, his tone brisk once more. "Now, if you will allow me, I should like to see this study at once, for if there is indeed an intruder within these walls, it is there, I fancy, that we shall find the thread which connects your fears to his purpose." Lady Alcroft rose, the rustle of her morning dress the only sound in that still room. She retrieved a small iron key from a chain at her waist, her hand trembling as she held it out. "You shall have it, Mr. Holmes. May it unlock more than doors." Holmes accepted the key with a slight bow, his face unreadable. "Come, Watson, let us see what secrets the late Sir Edward Alcroft has left us." The study of the late Sir Edward Alcroft was located at the farthest end of the west wing, removed from the daily comings and goings of the household. Lady Alcroft led us there with obvious reluctance, her hand quivering upon the lamp she carried, as if even its modest glow might waver in the presence of unseen eyes. The key turned reluctantly in the lock, and as the heavy door swung open, a draught of stale air met us mixed with the smell of old paper and dead cigars. The room was large, lined from floor to ceiling with books whose covers showed the dust of neglect. Yet upon the great desk at the centre lay signs of recent disturbance, a scatter of papers, a quill knocked sideways, and a blotting pad that held a fresh dent. Holmes entered like a hound unleashed, his look leaping from shelf to drawer, from hearth to window, with swift, exact calculation. He bent at once over the blotting pad, holding it to the lamp, then gave a soft grunt of satisfaction. The hand that wrote upon this was no amateur, Watson. The pressure is strong, the strokes impatient. We shall see what can be recovered. He laid it aside carefully before moving to the window, where he studied the latch with minute attention, tampered with beyond doubt, yet the hand was skilled. No rough forcing here, but the touch of one used to delicate work. Lady Alcroft clasped her hands tightly. You see, then, that I was not mistaken. Indeed, madam, whoever moves within this house does so with a practiced stealth. That he has sought this room more than once is highly significant. Tell me, were these shelves always so? He pointed to a row of volumes, where the dust showed marks of recent removal. She shook her head. My husband kept certain papers hidden within his books. It was his habit, though he never spoke of what they contained. Holmes's eyes gleamed. An old trick. The safest hiding place is often in plain sight, yet someone else knew or guessed the trick. That alone tells us the enemy is no stranger. He looked at the desk next, his fingers touching its surface as if it might give up its secrets to his touch. With sudden energy he pulled open a drawer, then another, each groaning upon its stiff runners. At the third he paused, holding it half closed. Watson, look. The lock has been filed from within. Someone had access to the original key, or a most exact knowledge of its making. He closed the drawer softly and turned back to Lady Alcroft. You must prepare yourself, madam. This is no random prowler, but one who knows Ravenhill intimately, its locks, its habits, its very silence. Her breath came quick, and she steadied herself against the chair. But who, Mr. Holmes? The servants are faithful, and no visitor has crossed this threshold unaccompanied. Holmes did not answer at once. He stood at the centre of the study, his head bowed, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin. At last he said, That question, Lady Alcroft, is the very essence of our inquiry. For the moment it must remain unanswered. It was later that night, when the household had withdrawn and the lamps were put out, that the true test began. I had gone to my room with a sense of unease that clung even to my dreams. At some unclear hour I awoke with the vivid feeling of sound, the soft creak of a floorboard, the slow opening of a door. I held my breath, trying to catch it again, and there it was, footsteps, deliberate and measured, moving along the hallway outside. I slipped from my bed as one who moves in response to a call not from without, but from danger within. The night wrapped the hallway in a velvet hush, through which each sound was sharpened into significance. The footsteps had stopped for a moment, and in that pause the house seemed to listen with us. Then they started again, softer now, as if the intruder had learned to make his step like a whisper. I drew back into the shadow of my door and peered along the gallery. A pale slice of moonlight lay upon the carpet, and within that silvered path a darker shape moved, slender, bent slightly, the outline of a man who paused beneath a portrait. Gloved hand raised to touch the frame, as if in practiced habit. A cold hand gripped my heart. Instinct told me to call Holmes, but caution advised silence. I steadied myself against the doorframe and crept forward, each nerve taut, each sense alert to the smallest shift. The intruder stopped as if sensing a presence. The moonlight showed the profile of his face, a thin line of nose, the ghost of a mustache, the glint of a cigar ember as he took it from his mouth and raised it to his lips. The smell of tobacco, strong and sweet, filled the hallway for a breath. It was the very smell Holmes had noticed before, the ash of certain city clubs rather than country hearths. My blood ran chill with the knowledge that we were not dealing with some uneducated footpad, but with a man of manners and plans. He moved again, passing the study door with that slow, familiar gait of one who knows the hours in which locks relax and servants dream. I followed at a distance that might challenge a hawk to spot, my boots making no sound upon the heavy carpet. When he paused before the study, he did not look at the lock. He drew from his coat a slender glinting tool, and with a practiced twist, the mechanism gave in as if in obedience. The drawer's secret had been made plain to him. He slipped into the room like a shadow pouring through a gap and closed the door softly behind him. For a moment I remained frozen, torn between the urge to rush forward and the wiser advice of watching. To charge blindly into the study might startle him into violence or allow him to snatch what he sought. To wait might let him complete his purpose. In that hanging moment, I heard another sound, a faint metallic click from beyond the far stair, as if someone else moved in the lower passages. Then a whisper of movement at the foot of the gallery alerted me to a second figure, slimmer and more sneaky, slipping into the wing near the servants' stairs. I realized with sudden dread that Ravenhill's night had become a theatre for more than a solitary thief. The house, which had previously seemed to brood in lonely silence, now breathed as a living thing, full of hidden motion and conspiracy. I crept to the study door, my hand upon the knob. Through the keyhole came the soft rustle of paper and the scratch of a pen, a private signature to theft. The lamp within threw a pale circle upon the desk, revealing the outline of a man hunched above a sheet, his shoulders moving with the quick business of one who reads and copies in haste. I could have burst the door in, then might have surprised him and secured the papers, but experience, sharper sometimes than courage, told me that a single rash movement would scatter the clue I sought. Besides, there was the matter of numbers. The distant stir I'd heard might mean that we faced not an isolated prowler, but a purposeful band. I stole back to my room to wake Holmes. Yet as I passed his door, I saw the crack of light beneath it. He stood within, hat in hand, his figure a dark outline against the lamp's glow. His eyes, when they met mine, were a bright flame of contained energy. "Watson," he whispered without surprise, "you observed correctly. There are two within the house. Keep to the shadow and mark their pattern. I shall intercept the one in the study. You will follow the other from the rear and see whether he leaves. Be swift and silent." It was not an order easily followed, because my heart hammered in my chest, but there was no hesitation in me. Holmes's plan was swift as light. He was out of the room and down the hallway like a greyhound after scent. I slipped from my hiding place and followed at a pace that showed no haste, rounding the gallery and going down the lesser stairs toward the servants' wing. The moon had shifted and now pierced through a window, casting long bars upon the floor. A dog in the kennels raised its head and whimpered, and the house seemed to tighten its breath. As I reached the lower passage, a half door at the scullery opened, and a figure darted through. This one smaller, with the walk of one used to moving unseen among kitchens and closets. He carried in his hand a folded paper pressed close to his chest, and his eyes, when they met mine for the briefest second, were quick with panic. He turned as if to run for the outer yard, but at that moment a firm hand closed upon his shoulder. Holmes crashed into the dimness, and a voice Holmes's cut the night with that low, inexorable authority I had so often heard before. "Stop where you are, sir. You are my prisoner until questions are answered." The man whom Holmes had seized stood rigid beneath his grasp, his breath coming in sharp bursts as if he had run a long chase. The lamplight from Holmes's hand revealed a face narrow and pale, the eyes darting with the sneaky gleam of one long used to hiding. He was dressed respectably enough, though his coat showed the frayed edges of long use, and his boots were caked with the mud of country lanes. In his hand he clutched a folded document so tightly that the veins stood out upon his knuckles. Holmes plucked it from him with effortless exactness, tucking it into his own pocket before the fellow could protest. "So you have taken liberties within Ravenhill House," Holmes said in a tone low but edged with steel. "Explain yourself, or by morning you will find the hospitality of Scotland Yard less forgiving than these walls." The intruder's lips parted, but no sound came out. He cast a glance toward me, then to the stairs behind us as if measuring the possibility of flight. Holmes's grip upon his arm tightened and the man winced. "Speak plainly," Holmes urged, "for silence will not shield you. What brought you here and whose errand do you serve?" Still the man said nothing. It was then that Holmes bent nearer, his sharp look travelling from head to toe with the quickness of lightning. "Ah," he whispered, "the cut of your boots, Watson. Do you notice it? The left heel worn lower than the right, the same mark we saw upon the dust in Lady Alcroft's unused room. Our visitor has left his signature upon the very floorboards." He straightened suddenly. "But see here, the ash upon his sleeve, not from any country tobacco, but from a rare Havana blend one finds only in certain clubs along the Strand. This is no rustic prowler. He has London stamped upon every fibre of his clothing. The fellow's composure wavered, a flicker of alarm crossing his features as Holmes laid bare these truths. At last he found his tongue. "Oh, you have no right," he muttered hoarsely. "I came only for what is mine." Holmes arched an eyebrow, his tone still even. "What is yours? Taken in stealth from a locked study at dead of night. Please enlighten me further, for the law has a curious interest in such definitions." The man shifted, but his voice grew firmer. "I sought only a letter, one that should never have lain in this house. Sir Edward kept it, though it belonged to me. I meant no harm to her ladyship, only to retrieve what was unjustly withheld." Holmes studied him for a long moment, then released his arm, though his presence alone held the man captive as surely as iron shackles. "A letter, you say, and for this you creep like a thief through shuttered hallways. Curious indeed. I think, Watson, that we had better examine the truthfulness of this claim before we send him to the constable." We escorted him back to the drawing-room where Lady Alcroft waited pale and anxious. At sight of the intruder she gave a stifled cry, her hand flying to her lips. "You, how dare you set foot here again?" The man shrank from her look, muttering something inaudible. Holmes motioned him to silence and turned to Lady Alcroft. "You know this gentleman, madam?" Her eyes blazed with sudden fire, and her composure cracked to reveal a storm of feeling beneath. "Know him? Indeed I do. He was once my husband's secretary, dismissed for dishonesty. His name is Carroway, and he has haunted our steps before. I warned Sir Edward never to trust him again." And now she broke off, trembling with anger. Holmes's look narrowed, and I saw the gleam of satisfaction that comes to him when the fog begins to part. "Carroway," he repeated softly, tasting the name as if it were a key upon the tongue. "Yes, that explains much. The trace of the clerk's hand in the dents, the quickness with the pen, the knowledge of the locks. You have returned, sir, not for what is yours, but for what you believe may profit you still. The only question that remains is what power lies within this letter. You risked so much to recover." The fire spat sharply upon the hearth, as if echoing the challenge, and in that flicker of flame I glimpsed the shadow of a larger design. Whatever lay hidden in those papers was no mere personal trifle. It was a clue to a darkness that had only begun to reveal itself. Carroway's defiance faltered beneath Holmes's unwavering look. He shifted uneasily, his hands twisting before him as if the truth itself were a physical burden he could scarcely contain. "It was not for profit," he muttered at last, his voice scarcely more than a whisper. "It was for survival. That letter, it holds my name bound to matters I never sought, matters that could ruin me if they came to light. Sir Edward promised it would be destroyed, and yet he kept it. Why, I cannot understand unless he meant to hold it as a weapon." Lady Alcroft drew herself up, her pale features sharpened by anger. "My husband was a man of honour. If he withheld your letter, it was for reasons beyond petty spite. Speak truly, Carroway. What dealings brought you to such desperation?" The man's eyes flickered, then fell to the carpet. His silence was answer enough. Holmes, with a gesture of restrained impatience, drew the folded document from his pocket and opened it upon the table. The handwriting within was elegant yet hurried, the ink smudged as if laid down in haste. I glimpsed a few phrases before Holmes shifted the paper from view. "The syndicate will not forgive. Funds to be sent, names to remain concealed." The words themselves were like sparks cast from a greater fire. Holmes read them swiftly, his face showing nothing, though his eyes gleamed with the light of revelation. "This, Watson," he said at length, "is no ordinary letter of debt or promise. It is a fragment of a larger fabric, one woven in secrecy and stitched with threads of peril. Our friend Carroway has been reckless enough to tie his fortunes to men who deal in influence and force. Whether he was a fool or a willing helper, I shall not judge tonight. What is clear is that Sir Edward, rather than destroying this paper, chose to preserve it, perhaps as protection, perhaps as evidence." Carroway's voice broke in urgent pleading. "Then give it to me. Without it I am undone. They will hunt me to the ends of England." Holmes folded the letter with deliberate care and returned it to his pocket, which is precisely why I cannot do so. "It is no longer merely your concern, but part of a mystery that has already cost one man his life and threatens to swallow another. If you value your safety, Carroway, you will speak more freely." "Who are they?" The secretary's face drained of colour. His lips moved, but only a single word escaped, hoarse and trembling the circle. Lady Alcroft gave a sharp gasp, pressing a hand to her chest. Holmes's face did not change, but I saw the tightening of his jaw. "The circle," he repeated almost to himself. "So the whispers hold truth after all." He turned abruptly to Carraway. "You have said enough to secure your own peril, and perhaps your redemption. You will remain here under my watch until the morning. Attempt flight, and you will find my reach extends further than you imagine." Carraway sank into a chair, his defiance spent, his figure crumpled like a man awaiting sentence. Lady Alcroft, her composure shaken, looked at Holmes with wide, questioning eyes. "Mr. Holmes, what is this circle? What shadow does it cast over my husband's name?" Holmes did not answer at once. He stood before the fire, the letter glinting in his hand, the flames casting long shadows against the walls. When he spoke, it was with the measured tone of one who weighs every word. "For now, madam, it's enough that we deal not with solitary mischief, but with a design both intricate and dangerous. Ravenhill's intruder is but the first thread. To trace it further will demand both courage and secrecy, for the circle is not easily unmasked." The fire crackled, the silence deepened, and in that moment I knew with certainty that our case had passed from the realm of domestic suspicion into the sphere of dangerous intrigue. The morning dawned grey and gloomy over Ravenhill, the fog drifting low among the hedges, as if reluctant to quit its hold upon the earth. Holmes, who had scarcely slept, called me early to Sir Edward's study, where the lamp yet burned upon the desk and Carraway sat huddled in a chair, his face pale and drawn. Lady Alcroft had retired, worn with exhaustion, leaving the responsibility of the investigation wholly to Holmes's resolute hands. My companion stood before the desk, the disputed letter spread open beside a scatter of other documents that he had drawn from the late baronet's drawers. "These papers, Watson," he said softly, "are more eloquent than a dozen reluctant witnesses. Notice how each fragment of correspondence hints at dealings hidden from both family and state. They are written in guarded phrases, full of roundabout ways and hints. Yet the pattern is unmistakable. Sir Edward was enmeshed in something larger than himself, something he both feared and sought to master." I leaned closer, tracing the lines of faded ink. There were notes in Sir Edward's hand, reminders of meetings in London, references to unnamed associates, curious symbols in the margin that suggested some code of his own devising. One sheet held a list of names, half of them crossed out, others accompanied by sums of money and the mysterious phrase pledged. It was plain even to my inexpert eyes that the late baronet had kept records of dealings far removed from any lawful commerce. Holmes drew a small packet from beneath the heap. "Here, Watson, is the most curious of all. A letter dated but 2 weeks before Sir Edward's death, written in his own hand, addressed not to his lawyer, nor to any family connection, but to an unidentified correspondent, whom he styles only as the guarantor. Hear how it reads." He lifted the page and read in a tone that carried the full seriousness of the words. "The sum is agreed, the names withheld, the bond secure. Yet I fear the circle presses closer than ever, and I must prepare. If I fall, let this be evidence enough. Burn it if you value your life." Holmes laid the paper down with a sharp movement, his eyes glinting. "Mark that, Watson, the dying man's warning, and a clue that he stood in dread of betrayal. He names no one, yet speaks of the circle as if it were an ever-tightening noose. Do you not see the significance?" I felt a chill pass through me, though the fire yet burned. "Then you believe, Holmes, that his death was no accident of stroke, but the silencing of one who knew too much?" Holmes nodded his head, his mouth a firm line. "I do not believe, I suspect. Belief waits for proof, and proof we shall find. But notice, Sir Edward foresaw the danger, and he left his testimony in code and letter alike. That alone suggests he had decided to oppose those who once held him captive." At this, Carraway lifted his head, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "You see now why I came, for my name is among those lists. I was drawn in as a mere scribe, a keeper of accounts, nothing more. They used me, discarded me, and left my ruin in Sir Edward's drawer. If that paper is brought to light, I am lost." Holmes looked at him coldly. "Better a ruined secretary than a widow undone, and a nation compromised." "Speak further, Carraway. Who else stood in the circle with Sir Edward?" But Carraway only shook his head, his eyes wide with dread. "I cannot. To name them is to die." Holmes turned away with a gesture of impatience. Yet I could see the quickening of his mind in the tautness of his frame. He gathered the papers, securing them within his case, and spoke with quiet resolve. "Then, Watson, we must let the dead man speak for himself. His words will guide us where the living falter." Holmes bent once more over the heap of correspondence, his long fingers turning over each sheet with reverence, as if the dry rustle of paper were the voice of the dead, whispering its truths. He paused suddenly, drawing forth a narrow slip, half hidden beneath a sheet of household accounts. It was no larger than a visiting card, yet upon it were written a series of figures and symbols in Sir Edward's unmistakable hand. Holmes held it up to the light, his eyes narrowing with delight. "A code, Watson, undoubtedly a code. See how the numbers correspond to certain letters, and how the recurring mark, this small circle with a bar across, appears at irregular intervals. It is a key, and a clumsy one at that. Sir Edward was no mathematician. With time I shall unravel it." Carroway let out a groan, burying his face in his hands. "You meddle with what should be left untouched. That code binds men whose reach extends far beyond Surrey. If they learn you have it—" He broke off, shuddering. Holmes's lips curved in a thin smile. "Then let them learn, for it is not in their power to put out the light of truth. Fear is their instrument, Carroway, and it plays too well upon your nerves. But it does not guide mine." He folded the slip carefully into his pocketbook and returned to the larger letters. "Notice this, Watson. Several of these bear the mark of a seal long since broken. The wax has left its trace on the paper's edge, a serpent biting its tail crudely drawn. Does that not accord with the circle?" Lady Alcroft, who had re-entered silently while Holmes spoke, gave a faint cry. "Yes, my husband once wore a ring with that very device. I asked of it, but he said only that it was a family relic. After his death, the ring was gone." Holmes seized upon the revelation at once. "Gone? Then it was taken, perhaps by the very hand that now creeps through your hallways. A symbol so obscure is not worn idly. It was his token, his bond to that society of shadows. When death claimed him, another claimed the emblem. Whether as heir or usurper, he turned, his eyes kindling. Watson, this ring may prove as vital as any letter. Whoever has it now has also the circle's trust or its suspicion." The widow pressed her handkerchief to her lips, her frame trembling. "Then I have sheltered under my roof not merely grief but peril itself." Holmes softened, if only by a shade. "Courage, madam. Peril foreseen is half disarmed. We shall take every precaution from now on, and I give you my assurance that no harm shall befall you whilst I remain at Ravenhill." He closed the desk with finality. "These papers will leave with me tonight. I shall not trust them to a house already compromised." The morning light had grown stronger, pushing weak shafts of silver through the ivy at the windows, yet it did little to dispel the heavy air of threat that seemed to thicken with each discovery. Holmes, however, appeared energized, his every movement brisk, his face alight with the energy of pursuit. As we left the study, he paused at the threshold, casting one last glance about the shadowed room. "Here lies the heart of the matter, Watson. Sir Edward's desk is an arsenal of secrets, and secrets have a way of calling those who would kill to possess them. We must walk carefully, for we walk not only in hallways of oak and stone, but in hallways of conspiracy." The door closed behind us with a hollow sound, and in that moment I felt with certainty that Ravenhill House had stopped being a country dwelling, and had become instead the entry chamber of some vast and unseen struggle. The day that followed was heavy with a strange expectancy. Though the fog had lifted from the grounds of Ravenhill, the air within seemed darker than ever, charged with tension that words could scarcely capture. Holmes spent the morning in close study of Sir Edward's code, his thin figure bent over the desk in the room given to him, while I kept watch upon the movements of Carroway, who remained subdued and silent, like a man awaiting his sentence. Lady Alcroft moved about her house with the strained composure of one used to dread, her eyes often seeking Holmes, as if he alone could banish the gathering storm. At lunch, Holmes spoke little, yet I noticed how his look lingered upon the newspaper folded at his side when at last he pushed his plate aside. He spread the paper open and tapped a short column buried deep within. "Notice, Watson, a report so slight it might escape a casual reader, yet it is precisely in such corners that the truth is most often concealed." I leaned closer and read, "Rumours persist of a circle of financiers whose influence extends beyond commerce into the sphere of politics. Meetings, it is said, have been held in secrecy at certain clubs along the Strand. Officials, when questioned, declined to comment. Holmes's eyes gleamed. There, Watson, is the echo of the word we heard last night. The circle, a whisper in the press, denied by authority, yet persistent enough to reach print. Combine that with Sir Edward's letters and the code we now hold, and you will see the outline of a design that stretches far beyond one Surrey household. Lady Alcroft, pale but resolute, clasped her hands upon the table. Do you mean to say, Mr. Holmes, that my husband was tangled with men who shape the affairs of government itself? Holmes nodded his head. Tangled, yes, but whether as victim or participant remains unclear. That he feared them is certain. That they profited by his silence is likely, and now his death, sudden and unexamined, appears less a natural misfortune than a convenient erasure. I admit that my pulse quickened at these words. Then we stand not against a solitary foe, but against a society whose power may reach even into Parliament. Holmes gave a thin smile. It is not the first time, Watson, that crime has clothed itself in the garb of respectability. Recall the Milverton affair. Men who stand in the light of day often cast the longest shadows. But let us not indulge too far in guessing. Evidence must guide us. He folded the paper with deliberate care. Still, it is instructive that rumour in London coincides with silence in Surrey. Where gossip thrives, secrecy grows. Carraway, who had sat mute throughout, suddenly raised his head. His voice was low yet urgent. You speak truth, sir. They are everywhere. Men of title, of influence, who sit in Parliament by day and meet in backrooms by night. I was but a scribe, yet I heard enough to know that their designs reached to ministries, to colonies abroad, even to the very cabinet. Sir Edward sought to withdraw, and for that he was marked. Holmes looked at him keenly. And now you too are marked, Carraway. Your fear betrays as much, but fear will avail you nothing. Only truth can shield you now. The man buried his face in his hands, muttering of ruin and pursuit. Lady Alcroft shuddered visibly, her composure strained to breaking. Holmes rose, his figure sharp against the window, the fading light framing him in austere relief. Watson, he said, we are no longer engaged upon a country mystery, but upon a conspiracy whose tendrils reach the very heart of London. Ravenhill is but the outpost of a greater fortress, and it is there we must next turn our gaze. The words rang in my ears like a solemn vow, and I felt that the true shape of our adversary had only just begun to emerge from the fog. That evening Holmes and I walked the gravel paths of the garden, the ivy-clad house brooding behind us, and the mist rising once more from the meadows. Carraway had been confined under watch, and Lady Alcroft had withdrawn to her room, leaving Holmes and myself alone beneath the dripping branches of a yew avenue. My companion's long stride carried him swiftly to and fro, his hands clasped behind his back, the faint glow of his cigar the only spark in the gloom. I knew the signs. His mind was weaving together each stray thread into that invisible fabric of reasoning, which only later he would lay bare. Watson, he said suddenly, halting before me, do you perceive the danger of this circle? It is not their existence that alarms me, but their method, a syndicate of financiers who manipulate both purse and policy. Such men need no daggers when they command the very instruments of the state. Sir Edward, drawn into their confidence, may have learned enough to imperil them. Hence his sudden death, hence the widow's haunting footsteps, hence Carraway's midnight theft. I nodded seriously. But surely, Holmes, to pit ourselves against men of such power is folly. Even if we unmask them, who will dare bring them to justice? His thin lips curved into a cold smile. That is the question which makes the chase worthwhile. We do not fight Parliament, my dear fellow. We fight the cracks in its walls. One man bribed, another blackmailed, a third ruined in silence. Such are the mortar of this circle. Expose the structure and it collapses by its own weight. We turned back toward the house, its narrow windows glinting faintly like eyes half closed in watchfulness. Holmes cast his look upward. Notice, Watson, how few rooms are lit, though a household of this size should teem with life. The silence of Ravenhill is not merely the silence of mourning. It is the silence of surveillance. Someone watches and someone waits. At that very moment a cry rang faintly from within. We hurried inside, the echo of our steps resounding through the hall. Lady Alcroft met us, her face pale, her hand trembling as it pointed toward the staircase. I heard it again, the step upon the landing twice now, though every servant is accounted for. Holmes bounded up the stairs with me close behind. The hallway stretched long and dim, the moonlight leaking through half-covered windows. He stopped suddenly, kneeling to examine the carpet. With his lens he traced a mark invisible to my eyes, then straightened, his face alight with certainty. "Our friend Carraway has not been alone. A second visitor moves here by night." A heavier step, the nails of the boots biting deeper into the pile. Someone of strength and confidence, not the sneaky steps of a secretary. Lady Alcroft clutched the balustrade. "Then who dares haunt my house still?" Holmes's voice was calm, though his eyes gleamed. "That, madam, we shall learn soon enough. But take comfort. Each trace they leave is another link in the chain that shall bind them." And already I fancy the circle grows uneasy, for the widow's silence is not the silence they sought. As he spoke, the wind rattled the windows, and the ancient timbers creaked as if the house itself bore witness. In that moment, I felt the full weight of the struggle into which we had been drawn, no longer a private mystery, but a conspiracy whispered in drawing rooms and written in code upon a dead man's desk. Ravenhill was but the threshold, and beyond it the shadows of London awaited us. Holmes was ever a master of transformation, and seldom had I seen his art employed to better purpose than on the morning he resolved to carry his inquiry beyond Ravenhill's gates. He emerged from his room, not in the familiar garb of the consulting detective, but in the coarse clothing of a rustic labourer, corduroy trousers, a smock of faded blue, and a battered hat pulled low over his brow. His hands, darkened with a smear of lamp-black, and the stubble upon his chin, completed the deception so effectively that had I not known the man, I should have taken him for a farmhand risen early to seek day work in the village. "I must move among them unseen, Watson," he explained in a voice pitched lower than his own, touched with the accent of the country. "The Circle does not send its agents only into the halls of Westminster. They have eyes and ears in every tavern and posting inn where gossip may be bought with ale. Lady Alcroft's name, her widowhood, her fortune, these are threads already tangled in their net. If I would follow that net to its knots, I must go as one they do not mark. I was not to accompany him in this role. My presence, he said, would hinder more than help." Thus I remained at Ravenhill with Lady Alcroft, attempting to reassure her, though my own heart was heavy with foreboding. Hours passed before his return, and when at last I spied his figure striding up the gravel drive, still clad in the rustic garb, I saw in his eyes that he had not gone in vain. We retired at once to the library, where Holmes threw off his disguise with impatient hands. "Watson," he said, "the inn at the village is a nest of whispers. One cannot sit there a quarter-hour without hearing the name of Ravenhill spoken in some form or another. The stableman swore that a stranger has been seen loitering at dusk near the gates, tall, broad of shoulder, with a scar that runs from temple to chin. He passes no word, yet his presence is marked. The villagers call him the Watcher." Lady Alcroft clasped her hands in alarm. "I have seen no such man." "Because he does not seek you openly," Holmes replied. "He bides his time beyond the walls, waiting for the house to yield what he cannot yet take. And mark this, Watson." The innkeeper told of a letter delivered there under plain cover, addressed to no name but bearing the same serpent's device we found upon Sir Edward's papers. It was collected by a messenger who did not linger, and none could say from where it came. The Circle's hand reaches even into the village tap-room. I asked if he had learned anything of Carraway's place in these rumours. Holmes gave a slight nod. "They speak of a man dismissed from service, seen in London in questionable company, now returned like a shadow to Ravenhill. The Circle does not forgive betrayal, and the whisper is that Carraway's life hangs by a thread. If he thought to shield himself by reclaiming his letter, he has only hastened the tightening of the noose." The widow shuddered, her look fixed upon Holmes. "Then all is lost." Holmes's face softened, though his words were firm. "Not while I remain upon the field, madam. Remember, the Circle thrives in silence. To drag them into the light is to wound them deeply. This Watcher at your gates is but the first ripple of a larger tide. We must discover who directs him, and for that I shall need patience and a little further masquerade." He struck a match, lit his pipe, and for a moment the fragrant smoke curled upward like a signal of war. "Watson," he added, "our adversary grows bolder. The Circle no longer confines itself to shadows within Ravenhill. It presses now from without. The net is closing, but upon whom and to what end remains the question." The following evening, Holmes once more adopted his rustic garb and slipped into the village, while I remained at Ravenhill with instructions to keep watch upon the household. The hours crept by in oppressive silence, broken only by the sigh of the wind in the chimneys and the distant bark of a dog upon the heath. Lady Alcroft retired early, her nerves worn thin by days of dread, and Caraway, restless and sullen, paced the lower hall like a man caught between fear and defiance. I admit that the weight of expectation bore heavily upon me. Each creak of the stairs, each flicker of shadow upon the wall seemed charged with threat. It was near midnight when Holmes returned, his step light but urgent, his eyes alight with that peculiar brilliance that spoke of discovery. He shed his disguise without a word, and beckoned me to the library where the fire yet burned low upon the hearth. There, with his usual economy of phrase, he unfolded what he had learned. The watcher, Watson, is no phantom of gossip. I saw him tonight with my own eyes, standing at the edge of the copse by the gate. A formidable fellow, tall, broad-shouldered, the scar upon his face giving him an aspect both sinister and unmistakable. He spoke to none, but when a villager approached he withdrew into the shadows, only to return when the lane was clear. He is no casual loiterer. He is stationed there with purpose. I asked if Holmes had ventured to follow him. I did, Holmes replied, though with caution. He made his way to the rear of the inn, where a door was opened to him without knock or word. Within, I overheard fragments of conversation, carelessly spoken but sufficient. They spoke of Ravenhill, of papers not yet found, and of a woman who must be persuaded by fear if not by reason. At this I started, but Holmes raised a hand. Yes, Watson, their design concerns Lady Alcroft, though its precise nature remains veiled. What is certain is that our presence here has not gone unnoticed. The circle grows impatient. They press their agent to strike more boldly. It is likely we shall soon be tested. He drew from his pocket a scrap of paper upon which he had hastily scrawled a few lines. A snatch of their talk. Listen, the guarantor waits in London. If the widow falters, the key is ours. The ring must not be lost again. Mark that, Watson, the ring. We were right to suspect its significance. Whoever holds it holds a token of trust among them. The fire hissed upon the hearth, and the owlet see the outline now. Sir Edward, once among them, kept their secrets yet sought to withdraw. His sudden death, the missing ring, the rifled study, the watcher at the gates, all are parts of a single design. And now the widow, by inheritance or by circumstance, possesses what they crave. The circle will not rest until it is theirs. I could not hold back a shudder. Then her life is in peril. Holmes's look met mine, keen and unflinching. So it is, Watson. But peril is also opportunity. For if we can draw them into the open, force them to reveal themselves in pursuit of their prize, we may yet strike at the heart of their conspiracy. He rose, pacing the library with that restless energy which ever preceded decisive action. Tomorrow we must prepare. The circle believes themselves unseen, but even the deepest shadow shows form when the light is rightly cast. We shall make Ravenhill our lantern and let them come. The day passed without incident, though its stillness was more oppressive than any outcry. Lady Alcroft moved through her house as one who listens for doom at every corner. Caraway kept to himself, a haunted figure whose eyes darted to each window as if expecting pursuit. Holmes, by contrast, wore an air of tranquil vigilance, pacing the hallways, measuring locks, noting every draught and creak, as if the house itself were a living accomplice to the crime. I had learned to trust that calm of his, for it was the mask behind which his mind worked furiously. It was after nightfall that the expected blow fell. We were gathered in the library, Holmes deep in study of the code, when the sharp rap of the knocker echoed through the hall. The servants, reluctant to stir, looked one to another until Holmes himself rose and opened the door. No visitor awaited us, only an envelope, sealed and propped against the threshold, its surface damp with mist. Holmes retrieved it with gloved fingers, his eyes narrowing as he examined the seal. "The serpent," he whispered, showing it to me. "The circle has written." He broke the wax with care and drew forth a single sheet. The hand was bold, the line swift and angular, as if the writer had set down his words in urgency. Holmes read aloud, "To the widow of Ravenhill you hold that which is not yours. Return it at once and all will be well. Refuse, and you will answer for your husband's fate. We do not warn twice." Lady Alcroft gave a faint cry, clutching the mantel as if for support. They know I have the papers." Holmes folded the letter with deliberation and slipped it into his case. "Not the papers, madam. The ring, that is their quarry. They believe rightly or wrongly that it lies still within your keeping. This letter is a demand thinly veiled as a threat. And observe, Watson, the arrogance of their tone. They are used to obedience, not resistance. Carraway sprang to his feet, his voice filled with fear. You see, now they will come for us all. Give them what they want. Better to yield than to be destroyed. Holmes silenced him with a single look. Yield, sir, and you place yourself forever in their grasp. Resist, and we may yet unmask them. There is no safety in giving in. He turned again to Lady Alcroft. Have you the ring in your possession, madam? Her face flushed, then paled. She reached slowly to a chain hidden beneath her morning gown and drew forth a small object. It was a ring heavy with age, the serpent device carved crudely in gold, its circle unbroken. She placed it in Holmes's hand with visible reluctance. I found it among my husband's things after his death. I dared not mention it, fearing what it might mean. If they seek it, let them have it. I cannot bear the peril it brings. Holmes examined the token closely, his lens glinting in the lamplight. A trifle of metal, yet the key to a conspiracy. With this they bind their members. With this they recognize one another. Small wonder they covet it, for without it their structure falters. He slipped it into his pocket. They shall not have it, Lady Alcroft. At least not on their own terms. The fire hissed. A draught stirred the curtains, and the letter lay upon the desk like a summons from some tribunal of shadows. Holmes stood tall, his look fixed upon the darkness beyond the window. They have shown their hand, Watson. The next move is ours. Holmes pocketed the ring as one might pocket a detonator, small, compact, and capable of astonishing ruin. For a few moments none of us spoke. The lamplight seemed to contract, drawing our faces into a closer, secretive circle. Outside the wind had risen and driven a fine spray of rain against the leaded panes, so that the world beyond the glass was a blurred, temporary thing, as if even the night itself wished to wash Ravenhill clean of its secrets. But secrets once sown do not wash away so easily. Holmes moved to the hearth and, with a deliberation as precise as any surgical motion, arranged the fire to throw a brighter light upon the papers strewn upon the desk. They have demanded the ring, he said, and in doing so they have revealed the degree of their danger. The circle will not content itself with mere intimidation. Their aim is recovery at any cost. They will attempt to seize, to steal, perhaps to burn. We must therefore prepare responses both cunning and immediate. He issued his directions with the economy of a man used to threatening machinery. Locks to be rechecked as servants, told that only 2 would leave the house at any hour. Certain cabinets to be emptied, save for decoys. To Lady Alcroft he spoke with a reassurance tempered by iron. To Carraway he gave a rebuke so fierce that the man shrank in his chair like a culprit before a magistrate. You shall remain under watch, Holmes declared. You will confess fully or answer to the law for your concealments. There can be no half measures now. Night thickened and we set our watches in silent rotation. I took my post near the library door, every nerve taut, eyes straining into the pool of darkness beneath the window. While Holmes patrolled the upper passages, like some greyhound that will not rest until scent is found. Hours passed with only the smaller noises of a great house going about its own business, the settling of beams, the distant cough of a hearth, the small metallic clink of a shutter. Yet each sound became important, each silence a mask. It was in the small hour, when the clock upon the mantel had struck 2 slow, lonely strokes, that a light moved upon the far lawn, a pale, wavering glimmer like a will-o'-the-wisp. I rose without stirring my companions and peered through the blind slats. There, beyond the clipped yew and close to the low wall, where the hedgerow thinned, a figure stood head bent as if in consultation with a hidden maiden of the dark. For a moment he was motionless, then he withdrew a note and tossed it gently upon the gravel. The light vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Holmes, who had been nearer the window, took the note with gloved fingers and read it under the lamplight. The script was hurried and crude. Surrender by dawn. Leave the house and you shall live. Resist and she dies, a friend. Beneath the line was smudged the faint impression of the serpent's seal. There are moments in which the air of a room becomes itself a character, and I felt it then total, as if the very oxygen conspired to alert the heart. Lady Alcroft fell to her knees as if struck. Carraway began to mutter prayers of some small, desperate religion. Holmes's face remained controlled, but his hand, quick as the strike of a spider, was already moving. They give us a deadline, he observed, and by that deadline they presume fear will dictate our hand. We shall meet their letter with strategy. He set to work at once with a calm that hid the storm beyond. He arranged a plan to unsettle the circle. False trails that would carry their attention into London, decoy packages placed for the taking, and a watch so contrived that the very aim of the attack would be to reveal its authors. If they come in force, he said, we will not flee. We will see their number and measure their courage. If they send one agent in the dark, we shall greet him in daylight. His voice, though soft, rang with the certainty of a man who had weighed the balance and found his measure. Outside, the night held its breath, as if to listen for the coming act. Within, we prepared for a drama whose curtain might rise at any moment. I thought of Sir Edward's desk, of the code half decoded, of the ring now hidden upon Holmes's person, and I understood with a clarity that chilled me that the conflict we engaged was not for coin or petty spite, but for the keeping of honor and the unmasking of a power that preferred shadow to law. The hand that wrote in darkness had made its threat plain. The hand that answers would write in light. The grey hour before sunrise has always struck me as the most strange of all. The world neither night nor day, the shapes of things blurred into suggestion, and every sound magnified against the hush. At Ravenhill that morning, the air seemed charged with an electric foreboding. Holmes had stationed me near the south hallway with orders to observe, but not to act until his signal. Lady Alcroft was confined to her room under the care of a loyal maid, while Carraway was kept in the small parlour, where a locked door and a watchful servant left him little chance of mischief. Holmes himself vanished into the misty grounds long before the first paling of the sky, his lean figure swallowed in fog. I knew better than to inquire of his plan. He gave me no more than a curt instruction to watch and trust me. The house lay in a silence almost oppressive, broken only by the faint ticking of the clocks. Then at last it came, the crunch of gravel on the drive, soft but purposeful, followed by the low creak of a door stealthily forced. My heart leapt, and I pressed myself against the wainscoting, straining to hear. Steps crossed the tiled hall, slow and deliberate. 2 men, I judged, by the uneven rhythm of their tread. One heavy, the other lighter and quicker, perhaps the scarred watcher Holmes had described. They spoke no word, but their intent seemed palpable, as if the very air bent beneath it. I glimpsed them through a narrow opening in the curtains as they passed toward the library. One carried a lantern hooded to a thin slit of light. The other held what looked like a length of iron wrapped in cloth. Their faces were obscured by scarves, yet their bearing showed discipline, not the shambling stealth of common burglars. They moved as men on a mission. I was about to wake Holmes when he appeared of his own accord, stepping from a shadowed doorway with the suddenness of an apparition. His voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the silence. "Gentlemen, your errand ends here." The taller of the pair started violently, his hand flying to his chest. The other raised the iron bar, but Holmes's revolver gleamed in the half-light, steady and unyielding. "No further," he said, "unless you wish to exchange threats for bullets." For a moment the scene held, Holmes poised like a blade. The intruders caught between flight and defiance. Then the shorter man gave a sharp whistle. From the outer darkness a third figure slipped in. This one masked more crudely, his stance showing the readiness of a hired ruffian. The odds, it seemed, had shifted. It was then that I, unable to remain passive, stepped forward with my own revolver drawn. "Holmes is not alone," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. The intruders wheeled, surprised to find themselves hemmed between us. The lantern beam wavered, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. Holmes's eyes blazed with a light I had seen only in the gravest moments of our adventures. "You will unmask," he commanded, "or I shall see to it that your faces are revealed in the dock at Bow Street within the week." The scarred man laughed softly, a harsh grating sound. "You play at justice, Mr. Holmes, but you do not understand the circle. We are the tribunal, not the accused. Step aside or we strike, and the widow of Ravenhill falls with you." Holmes's reply was as swift as it was cutting. "A tribunal that sends burglars at dawn is no tribunal, but a nest of cowards. And you, sir, have already betrayed more than you know. I think the circle will not thank you when your likeness is described to every inspector, from here to Whitehall." At that the heavy-set man faltered, shifting uneasily, while the third kept glancing toward the door as if his courage were fast dissolving. I felt that the moment hung in a delicate balance, and that a single movement might tip it toward violence or surrender. The scarred man's defiance cracked first. His hand trembled upon the lantern, and in the wavering beam his scar stood livid, a badge of violence half concealed yet undeniable. Holmes advanced a step, revolver steady, his voice as cold as steel. "Drop it," he said. The iron bar clattered to the floor, the sound startling in the silence. At that instant, the third fellow, seeing the tide turn, made a dash for the open door. I sprang forward, intercepting him with more zeal than grace, and we went down together upon the tiles. He struggled like a wildcat, but the memory of my old campaigns lent me strength, and I pinned him till Holmes's whistle brought 2 of Lady Alcroft's servants to secure him. Meanwhile, the scarred watcher and his heavy companion stood cowed, their scarves dragged from their faces by Holmes's swift hand. The taller was indeed the same man I'd glimpsed by moonlight, brutal of feature, yet with the calculating eyes of one who serves a master more subtle than himself. The other, to my astonishment, was no stranger but a man I'd seen in London drawing rooms, a minor functionary attached to a political office. His name whispered now and again in connection with dubious contracts. At sight of me he turned his head, but Holmes caught his chin with merciless precision. "Look well, Watson," he said. "Here is proof enough that the circle is no myth of rumour. Its tendrils reach into Parliament itself. Lady Alcroft, drawn by the commotion, appeared at the head of the stairs, her paleness striking against her morning gown. Mr. Holmes, who are these men? Why do they haunt my house?" she cried. Holmes nodded his head gravely. "They are agents, madam, of the circle to which your late husband was bound. They came not for plunder, but for the ring which you so wisely surrendered into my keeping. It is their token of allegiance, without which they are blind to one another. Its absence breeds mistrust, and mistrust is poison to conspirators." At this the scarred man spat an oath. "You meddle in matters beyond your reckoning, Holmes. Break one branch and 10 more shall grow." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then it is fortunate I do not intend to prune but to uproot." He turned to me with brisk command. "Watson, see that this one's wrists are bound. We shall deliver them to Lestrade with their own letter as evidence. The circle may hide behind shadows, but even shadows leave outlines in the light of dawn." The first pale shafts of sunrise broke then through the ivy-clad windows, gilding the hall with reluctant warmth. It seemed to me a symbol, an unmasking not merely of faces but of forces long concealed. Lady Alcroft descended slowly, her hand trembling upon the balustrade. "Then it is over," she whispered. "The footsteps, the whispers, the dread of every night." Holmes looked at her kindly, yet with that reserve he always maintained between sympathy and certainty for Ravenhill. "Yes, but the circle itself still walks abroad, and its unravelling will not be swift. What matters is that you, madam, are free of its grasp." Carroway was brought forth from his confinement, his face grey with relief and shame alike. At sight of the captured intruders, he sank to his knees, muttering that the circle would never forgive him. Holmes looked at him without pity. "You must make your choice, Carroway. Either face them in silence and perish, or speak and aid the law in tearing away their masks. Redemption is not given. It is earned." And so as the sun rose over Ravenhill and the captured men were led away, I felt the strange mingling of triumph and foreboding that often followed our adventures. We had struck a blow in defence of truth. Yet in Holmes's steady look, I saw the knowledge that this case was but one skirmish in a greater war. A war waged not with open battle, but with secret silence and the dangerous weight of hidden power.